Good afternoon, everybody. I think I can say that now. Unfortunately, my slides don't have a replacement hip, but hopefully you still find the information informative and I can keep your attention. But what I want to do today, well, first, before I get started, I want to thank, obviously, IPPSR for continuing to support our research in this area, including the study I'm going to talk about today, and also for holding this event and asking us to be part of it. So thank you. And what I'm going to talk about today is I'd like to put a bit more context on product counterfeiting in Michigan. And what we really wanted to do with this study was take advantage of a national incident database that we've been developing over the past couple of years, where we've been trying to capture publicly known. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? All right. Sorry about that. John's a little taller than me, so I had to bring it down a notch. So I'll just restart this slide. Basically, I want to just put some context on product counterfeiting in Michigan. A lot of this work is driven by a national incident database that we've been developing over the past few years in ACAP, where we've been trying to capture publicly known U.S.-related incidents since 2000. So what was neat for this particular study is we could basically just look inside that database that we've already been growing and extract out cases that had some connection to Michigan. We tried to be inclusive with that approach. We looked at incidents where we had Michigan residents offending both in and out of state, cases where a Michigan-based company was violated, or something like an in-state seizure. So we tried to be very inclusive. So anything along those lines we captured. I did want to note, compared to some other common, violent or property offenses, that 47 seems like a low number. But again, we had to rely on open sources, basically cases that had come to light. So this dark figure of crime, or the true number of incidents, is likely much larger than that. And I should also note, and you've probably heard a lot about this already so far, but while these cases are somewhat low in number, they're obviously large in their reach, their impact, and their consequences. And for the purposes of this study, I should add that our goal here was to examine the nature of product counterfeiting in the state, and not necessarily draw any conclusions about its prevalence. So these 47 cases revealed some interesting case studies that were very informative. We were able to calculate some descriptive statistics to start putting some numbers around this problem in our state, and this all fed into and informed some concrete policy lessons. And I'll talk about all of those today, but obviously I can't cover everything. So I've noted down at the bottom there the full reports that if you want more information, make sure to look at those. And I think the last two are actually in the packet that you got today. So the place I want to start right now is basically putting product counterfeiting in a context where some people may not consider. And first, we'll look at this emerging link between product counterfeiting and terrorism. We learned in 2006 of a group of nearly 20 individuals operating primarily in the Detroit area. And by all accounts, this was a large-scale criminal operation. When you started to peel away the layers, you started to see that this didn't spring up overnight. Just in terms of its sheer scope, it spans several years, across several states, and also countries as well. If you look at the counterfeiting element of this crime, two industries were hit. We have the tobacco industry represented, as well as pharmaceuticals. These individuals were counterfeiting both cigarette rolling papers as well as Viagra. And they were also active in other types of crime as well, including money laundering, cigarette smuggling, and things along those lines. And then finally, in terms of the scale of this operation, one report estimated that just the counterfeiting rolling papers alone had a value of $16 million. Okay, so you can see the enormous profits that can be potentially made in this type of crime. But what was particularly alarming about this case was that it was reported that a portion of those proceeds went to fund various operations of recognized terrorist group Hezbollah. So while that's alarming, I should caution that the extent and depth of the ties between product counterfeiting and terrorism are not well known yet. So obviously more research needs to be done to really clarify that question. But we do see it here in this case. But eventually this operation was taken down, and Michigan authorities had played a pivotal role in that. Particularly the Detroit Joint Terrorism Task Force arrested several individuals, Michigan residents who were involved, some of which who were later sentenced to prison, received various monetary penalties, and some were even deported. Now, I want to touch on another case just to add a bit more context. Again, as our state continues to climb towards economic recovery in the past few years and looking forward, obviously our auto industry is going to play a pivotal role in that. So I wanted to touch briefly on how product counterfeiting can potentially affect automakers. So one case that we found in our data deals with an auto parts store located in New York City that was counterfeiting various parts. And what's peculiar about this case is that the owner of the store was actually arrested twice in the same year. And according to one report, he quite literally moved his shop around the corner and was able to continue his counterfeiting activities. So one of the things I'll talk about later is how we need, the criminal justice system needs to make a serious, immediate response post-arrest so that those activities don't continue. But again, you see the tremendous scale here. There were two seizures, one at almost $750,000 in counterfeited parts and the other at about $1 million. So you can see the kind of profits that are potentially coming out of the pockets of our automakers, and that money is certainly not coming in to the Michigan economy. But beyond the economic impact, you have to look at the parts that were involved in this case. They're critical parts with serious safety implications. We're talking about things like brake pads and rotors and taillights, windshields that didn't contain shatterproof safety elements. So these are the kind of parts that if they fail, they can potentially lead to accidents and even injuries and unfortunately even deaths. So as the last bit of context, before we get into some more of the descriptive statistics from our study, I think it's really important to talk about Michigan residents. These are the consumers in this situation, and we're talking about consumer material goods, so things that can get into my hands, your hands, the hands of our neighbors. So what I did to illustrate the risk and how that varies across different products, I made this color-coded graph here. And if you look all the way to the left in the yellow, these are the products that you might traditionally think of when you hear product counterfeiting, worn apparel, things of that nature, luxury goods. In this category, the product itself probably isn't going to hurt you, but we're learning, especially with that terrorism example, that the individuals behind these products may not be so innocent. Then moving along to the right there, things kind of heat up on the graph, and that just indicates the potential harm somewhat increased. And I should mention that these are all products found in Michigan, based on our data. So this is not just a global or national snapshot. This is Michigan we're talking about right now. So toys that smelled like kerosene that were seized that could get into the hands of our kids, cleaning products that could contain various hazardous chemicals, along with batteries that over time could catch small fires. Now we end on this red cell here, where you take a look at the products and you see very serious, very direct, very immediate potential harms. We're talking, obviously, medicines. That's a primary concern, but also health and hygiene products, particularly ingestibles, like John mentioned, toothpaste, propane tanks, cause for major explosion, and at the very end, they're nuclear power plant parts. So here, part failure could be catastrophic. So the message here, and I think that's been loud and clear so far, is that product counterfeiting often goes beyond just a fake T-shirt. These are products that can cause real harm and can get into your hands. So besides just the risk of the products themselves, what we also found somewhat surprising in our data are the places where individuals are coming into contact with these products. Some, you might expect, illicit businesses like replica stores that are selling counterfeit apparel, flea markets that are poorly regulated, and obviously online counterfeits are just a few clicks away, as John showed with his eBay example. But then there's those places where you might not expect to come into contact with these products. As John mentioned, again, your local grocery store. And even everyday life, something, when you look at the auto parts, something as routine as getting in your car for your daily commute, counterfeit products pose a potential danger there as well. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and start to put some more concrete numbers on this. We had all that open source information on these 46 cases, and we actually coded it so that we could perform some data analysis. And we looked at a number of dimensions, but I've organized things here in terms of we looked at the nature of incidents as well as actors. I'll talk about incidents first, and then on the next slide look at the actors. But I do want to mention, it's important to note that these numbers are based on known circumstances. So for some of these cases, we just couldn't find the information in the open sources. So if we did, perhaps some of those figures would change. But I'll go through these pretty quickly so we can get to the policy implications. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'm just making sure. I'm struggling with the mic. But 60% of the incidents are linked to other states. On average, about 3 suspects were involved, so we see multiple offenders establishing these networks. Median seizure size was pretty considerable at almost $300,000, but you see it went well into the millions. 26% of our cases had international ties to other countries, and 45%, so nearly 50% of the cases, there was a state or local authority that acted in some way to intervene in the incident. And of particular interest, 15 incidents, that was a Michigan state or local authority. 25% of incidents, we saw a partnership between state and local federal agencies, and I'll talk more about that later. 21%, there was an arrest in Michigan, so on Michigan soil, an arrest was made in connection with one of these incidents. And then the average investigation, it was about just over a year at 13 months. So what's encouraging to see that is a lengthy investigation, and it's great to see that locals are still active in combating this crime. And then lastly, 23% of our cases resulted in at least one conviction. So I'll keep moving along here and talk a little bit about what we found out about the actors behind these cases. We were able to find 126 known or identified actors. 107 of those were individuals or people. 19 were businesses. When we looked at the people involved and when we could find residents in our data, we found that nearly 50% were actually Michigan residents, and 11 of those 19 businesses involved were located in Michigan. We also looked at criminal charge type. Nearly 60% of these individuals were charged with a non-IP crime. So just under 1 in 4 was actually charged with an IP crime, and 16% were charged with both types of offenses. Moving on, less than 40% were convicted of an IP crime. I'll talk more about that too on the next slide. But just to round this out, the average monetary penalty, close to $300,000, but again, you see that went into the millions, and the average prison length was just over 2 years. So that leads us to the obvious question, what can policymakers do to start thinking about addressing this problem? And those last couple slides speak to some very concrete policy lessons that I'll go over right now. First of all, we recommend just taking a closer look at the state level IP laws here in Michigan. I just mentioned that oftentimes some of these suspects were not charged with or convicted of IP crimes. So it seems useful to take a closer look at the familiarity of these laws among our law enforcement officials as well as prosecutors, but also to determine whether or not these laws are adequate. Do they fit the crime of product counterfeiting? But the key with this bullet point is really to understand why certain cases are prosecuted and how they're processed, and look to ways to improve that process. The second policy lesson that we came up with was just to assess the awareness and needs of local and state police. Again, we just covered that both are active in this crime, and we saw that certainly here in Michigan, from our Michigan State Police to larger jurisdictions like the Detroit Police, but even smaller township jurisdictions are getting involved in this. So this goes to show that despite the scope and scale of this crime, that you don't have to be a large, well-resourced federal agency to have an impact here. So the key to that is obviously that so that law enforcement can be effective when they're combating it, and to encourage them to continue their efforts, what's important is that when they do make an arrest, that they see that arrest followed through with prosecution. A third policy recommendation is just to facilitate interagency coordination in and across states. Again, our data spoke to that locals are not doing this alone. They often partner with federal agencies. And the nature of product counterfeiting demands that in a lot of ways, given its complexity and span, length of investigation. So I think it's important to look, that policymakers look for ways to promote those partnerships, whether it be through resources, increased training, or just developing best practices. And also in this category, it would be useful to pursue and take a closer look at public-private partnerships and those collaborations. Obviously, industry has a lot at stake with product counterfeiting. They're eager to do something about this, so, and we saw in our data that they do partner with law enforcement across all levels. So it would really behoove policymakers to look at ways to promote those relationships as well. And obviously leverage industry's motivation, their expertise, their knowledge, and their resources. So then finally, our last policy lesson that came from these data was just that we think it's important to educate our public, our Michigan residents, consumers, about the harms and risks of product counterfeiting. We saw in our database that some cases started because a consumer detected a problem and reported the problem. So in many ways, our Michigan residents, our consumers, can be a key intervention point. They're the ones that interact with these products, so they can detect when something's wrong and report it. So that's really important. So I guess I'll just end by saying that industry is important, our residents are important, and law enforcement is important, and these are all policy lessons driven by our data. So I thank you for your time, and I'll pass the presentation over to Special Agent Burgess.